Good evening. My name is Marlene Williamson. Welcome to the New York Society for Ethical Culture, a humanist community dedicated to ethics, social justice, and education since 1876. We celebrate life's joys, support each other through life's crisis, and work to make a more caring world. Join us for our community and cultural programs where people meet to explore and embrace ethical living. We are delighted to host and partner with the Guttmacher Institute to explore the changes in this past year after that sacred right was taken away. Reproductive freedoms are a sacred space. The Ethical Society has been an unwavering supporter of women's health since before Roe versus Wade. Learn more about us at our website, ethical.nyc. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you so much, Marlene, and the entire New York ethical culture for welcoming us for this event. My name is Dr. Herminia Palacio. I am the president and CEO of the Guttmacher Institute, and along with Ethical Culture, we are hosting this event really to mark the one-year anniversary of the Dobbs decision, which is handed down by the Supreme Court of the United States on June 24th, 2022. In that 1 year, since that 1 year, abortion is now banned in 13 states, and it's essentially not happening at all in Wisconsin, a 14th state, due to legal uncertainty. This has far-reaching effects, not just here in the United States, but its impact globally. The United States, with this action, has the dubious distinction of being only the 4th nation in the world to roll back abortion rights since the mid-1990s. We join Poland, Nicaragua, and El Salvador in rolling back these rights. The rollback of these rights is many of the assaults that we're seeing now, the assaults on democracy, the assaults on immigration, the assaults on LGBTQ and trans rights. All of these rights are an affront to all of us. They violate all of our principles about humanity and dignity and the ability of people to live and find dignity, joy, and love. But there's hope. While the rollback of these rights disproportionately affect those for whom rights have been hard-won, they disproportionately affect Black and brown communities, immigrant communities, disability communities, LGBTQ communities. This is a truth that we need to stare in the face. But we have faced dark times before. We have been ready to fight, to shed light before, and you will hear from our panelists today who are doing exactly that. As you listen to this rich conversation, I hope you have index cards. You can write your questions as they come to your mind. We have staff here, just raise your hand, who will collect the index cards, and I will take these questions and hand them to our moderator. We will try to take as many questions as we can, time allotted, including questions that have been submitted in advance from our online audience. And with that, it is now my great honor, privilege, and delight to introduce our moderator, Professor Melissa Murray. She will moderate this conversation as a leading expert in family law, constitutional law, and reproductive rights and justice. She is the Frederick I. and Grace Stokes Professor of Law at New York University School of Law and the faculty director of the Birnbaum Women's Leadership Network. Many of Melissa's scholarly publications, such as The End of Roe v. Wade and The New Legal Frontiers on the Constitutional Right to Abortion, have appeared in highly respected legal journals. But you may recognize her as someone who also regularly shares her expertise with us through the popular press, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, The Nation, and Newsweek for the print media. She's also frequently a legal contributor to MSNBC, CNN, NPR, PBS, and ABC News, and she co-hosts Strict Scrutiny, a podcast about the Supreme Court and the legal culture that surrounds it. As you can see, Professor Murray is incredibly busy, and with that, I extend that she has a commitment to share some of her expertise with those beyond us, and will need to exit the stage a little bit early, and we are especially grateful that she has sharing her expertise and her time with us. She is also a member of the board of directors of the Guttmacher Institute. So with no further ado, I turn it over to Melissa to moderate this session.
Herminia, thank you so much for that generous introduction, and thank you to everyone at Ethical Culture for supporting this event tonight, and to all of you for joining us here today. And I'm just going to first say a little bit about the elephant in the room, literally the elephant in the room. What's going on with the Supreme Court? Again, we got another blockbuster decision from the Supreme Court today, this time dismantling affirmative action in higher education admissions. And wherever you stand on this particular policy choice, I think it's safe to say that affirmative action has perhaps been one of the most successful public policy interventions in terms of actually making the promise of a multiracial, inclusive democracy happen over the last 50 years. And the court's decision today effectively begins the process of unraveling that. It would be very easy for us to think about the court's decision today on affirmative action and its decision a year ago on Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization as two distinct and unrelated decisions. And I want us to resist that particular framing. We so often silo the issues that come before the court, and when we do that, it's really hard to understand the connections and see the broader picture of what the court is doing and how it's actually impacting our lives. So yes, Dobbs was a case about reproductive rights and abortion. The case that came out today, Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard and the University of North Carolina, is a case about affirmative action in higher education. But at bottom, both of these decisions are about the tools and the mechanisms that are essential to promote a multiracial, multi-ethnic democracy in which women and people of color can participate as equals. And if we don't start understanding all of these issues as part of a broader assault on democracy and democratic institutions, we will lose the democracy that we have. And so, just to frame our conversation today, this is not just about abortion. This is about the tools that women and families need in order to participate as equals in society. This is not just about affirmative action. This is about the tools that people from groups that historically have been excluded and unrepresented need to be able to come into society and contribute equally as equals. And so if we start from that premise, I think, we can have a much richer conversation, see the connections between what might be seemingly disparate issues, and understand more completely the way in which this court is not a normal one. This is not a court that is working in support of a multiracial, multi-ethnic democracy. It is doing exactly the opposite, and it is effectively rolling back the 20th century with each decision. All right, so on that light note, I'd like to introduce our panels. We have so many terrific experts here to share their knowledge with us today. I'm excited to be in conversation with our colleagues in this room and to hear remotely from Mallah Tabot of International Planned Parenthood Federation, the Africa Regional Office, as well as Paula Avila-Guilen of the Women's Equality Center. They could not be with us tonight, but they have generously recorded video remarks that we will hear over the course of the evening, and through those media, they will share their contributions with us. But we are very, very fortunate to have in the room with us tonight some real all-stars. So, to my direct left is New York State Assembly member and reproductive justice champion Jessica González-Rojas. To her left is Kwajelyn Jackson, the executive director of Feminist Women's Health Center in Atlanta, Georgia. To her left, Guttmacher's own Kelly Baden, the vice president for public policy. And rounding us out, last but not least, is Irum Taqi, the director of global policy for Guttmacher. So, first question to everyone on the panel. It has been a year since the court overruled Roe versus Wade and Planned Parenthood versus Casey in Dobbs. What is the most urgent thing about the aftermath of this groundbreaking decision that you would like the public to know?
I always start with a quote. Audre Lorde said, "There's no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issue lives." And I think it perfectly encapsulates the foundation you laid in talking about this issue. What's happening across the country to our communities is very intentional. It is about power and control over our lives and our bodies. And as someone who spent decades working at the intersections of reproductive justice, Latina rights, immigration, LGBTQ liberation, economic justice, it's heart-wrenching to see what's happening and the damage that has been done by the Trump administration. He may not be our president any longer, but we're certainly feeling the impacts of his decisions and his placement and the opportunities that he created by installing such a hostile Supreme Court. Prior to running for political office in 2020, I was the executive director of the National Latina Institute for Reproductive Justice. Yay, shout out to the Latina Institute. Prior to being at Latina Institute, I was at the New York University Center for Multicultural Education and Programs. So I actually feel like my worlds are colliding right now because I saw the benefits of affirmative action programs. I saw the promise and the brilliance of our students of color that may have never been able to get to places like NYU without opportunities that are afforded through affirmative action. And I see how policies impact the real lives of people who are often marginalized and often excluded from the ability to travel across the country if they live in a state that's hostile to abortion. In working with Latinas across the country, I saw what it meant to look at an immigration system that tore families apart. That was reproductive justice. Reproductive justice was acknowledging that we needed economic justice so that everyone can make the decisions for themselves and their families. And the ways in which the policies has rolled out across the country, we've seen a direct attack on our autonomy and our ability to make these decisions because they target the people most vulnerable. A wealthy person, likely white woman, right, is able to get on a plane and travel to a place like New York to get abortion care if she's in a hostile state. A trans person, a undocumented person, someone who doesn't speak the language, people who are, again, living in poverty because of the systemic impacts of everything that we're dealing with in this country are limiting their ability to fulfill their promise in the world. You see that. They are the ones who are often self-managing their abortions or forced to carry a pregnancy to term that they do not want. So we have to remember what this is about. This is about forced pregnancy. And it is gut-wrenching to see that happen across the country, especially with the work I've done for so many decades. But in my role as a state assembly member, I'm working so hard to advance policies that disrupt that we are investing in the providers that are doing this work, and also making sure we're breaking down the barriers for community members to get access to that care.
So can I interrupt you for a minute? Like, since we're talking about providers, Kwajelyn, you're on the ground in Atlanta providing this care. How has that landscape changed over the course of just 1 year?
Certainly. So we currently provide both medication and procedural abortion care up to the point at which fetal cardiac activity is detectable. So that's not an exact weeks or days, but it is a fetal development measure. Prior to that, we were providing abortion care up to 22 weeks from the last menstrual period, or what's like colloquially known as a 20-week ban. So we, over the course of July 2022 to now, have seen our abortion volume cut in half, if not more. It's slowly beginning to creep back up, but we've seen just a fraction of the people who we know need access to care. I will say what has stayed the same is that even before Dobbs was decided, even while Roe was the law of the land, people have had to travel for care. So that is not a new phenomenon, but it is greatly exacerbated in this moment. So we are still seeing patients coming from Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, Texas, Oklahoma, Louisiana on a regular basis, because all of those states have lost access completely, with no exceptions. So we're fortunate in the fact that abortion is not the only service that we provide, and so we have been able to stay afloat. We have been able to retain our talented, dedicated staff who continue to provide that care, as well as our advocacy, outreach, and education staff who are trying to do movement building in the state to restore what has been taken from us. But many, many independent providers have had to close because even if they were able to continue to provide some level of care, it's not enough to stay open. Abortion, I'll tell you, abortion doesn't cash flow. Like, in order for us to continue to keep abortion care as affordable as possible to the very communities that Jessica was describing, we don't make enough to be able to also cover paying all of our staff a living and thriving wage, maintaining property, continuing to the upkeep of equipment. All of those things are extremely costly, and we do not want to pass that burden on to the patients who need us so desperately. So many things have changed, and also many things have stayed the same.
So Kelly, what's the public policy landscape, especially since the court told us that Dobbs is going to return this to the states for democracy? So what does democracy look like?
I think you referenced it. Democracy is in shambles in many ways, and abortion is just one part of that, I think, really devastating puzzle. And so as Herminia said in her opening, abortion is banned completely in 13 states, unavailable in one more, and then there's this patchwork access of various other kinds of abortion bans at different points in pregnancy and other restrictions, to Kwajelyn's point, that existed long before the Dobbs decision, that have always made abortion difficult to access for some people, depending on their zip code, their bank account, and a whole host of other factors. And so we saw this year, more different abortion bans in states like Florida, of course, and North Carolina, and South Carolina, and Nebraska. And I think one thing that I will note is that the fight has very much around bodily autonomy, freedom, is now also showing up in bans on gender-affirming care, right? These are very much the same actors who are pushing these policies. And I point to Nebraska this year where there was an attempt to ban abortion at around 6 weeks. It failed kind of by the skin of its teeth, and then they decided to advance a ban on gender-affirming care and attach a 12-week abortion ban to it. And I think it's just such a perfect illustration of their strategies and tactics really being two sides of the same coin and just doing whatever they can to restrict our rights and our bodily integrity.
That's right.
So Irum, that seems pretty bleak, what we've heard in the domestic landscape. Is there any glimmer of hope on the international front?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, Dobbs is, a devastating setback in the U.S., of course, but, we are hearing concerns also from our global partners, right, about the sort of ripple effects of the decision and the potential to roll back abortion rights in their countries. But on the sort of glimmer of hope side, there are, Dobbs also presents opportunities, right, for mobilization and really for us to learn from our global partners. Countries such as Ireland, Benin, Mexico, Colombia, Argentina have recently expanded access to abortion, and they offer inspiration to us. And so, I think we really need to center partnerships and, advocates in the U.S. And in countries around the world have so much to learn from each other, and we can, really support each other to protect, not just abortion rights, but sexual reproductive health and rights, human rights, gender justice. So yeah, I think the partnership piece is really key.
Yeah. So there's some hope on the international front, certainly for coalition building and for learning lessons from some of our global partners. There's also a real opportunity on the local level. And again, we have to play in all of the arenas available to us. So Assemblymember González-Rojas, what's happening in New York? Lots of people say that New York is a blue state, which means it's safe. Is that overstated? Spoiler alert, yes. What's New York doing? How have your public policy priorities changed since Dobbs? And what are the quick wins that we can get right now at the state and local level, and what needs to be done?
So when Dobbs was leaked, I literally dropped a bill that I was working on with many advocates, because as advocates in the field, we knew that Roe was not being held sacred. So we were prepared, and what we dropped the bill on was something called the Reproductive Freedom and Equity Fund Act that would essentially create an abortion fund for New York State. New York City has one that's city funded, but this fund would allow for funding for three things: providers' capacity, resources, the things you talked about, the equipment, the staff, et cetera. And then two, to cover uninsured and underinsured folks, right? And then three, which most importantly is part of that practical support, whether you need an abortion doula, you needed to stay in a hotel, you needed to travel, childcare, et cetera. We were fighting for that. The governor was able to issue a $35 million fund herself, but it was a one-time shot. So we know, and I could look to you all, that unfortunately one-time shots are not gonna address this issue and make sure that we are the safe haven state that we claim to be. We need to make continual investments and make sure that we're investing in the communities that have worked directly with patients that need access to that care. So my fund would give funding to the abortion funds that are doing that on-the-ground work. So that's just one thing. We just passed a SHIELD law, which is really exciting, that would protect providers who are doing telemedicine. Providing telemedicine across the country. And doctors like Linda Prine, who's incredible, is like ready to prescribe medication in other states where abortion is essentially, banned or extremely limited. So we're trying to do everything what we can. There's a lot more to do. And again, I'm always holding the folks who have the least resources, are undocumented, don't have access to vehicles or cars. About 350,000 people, women of reproductive age in New York, live in a county that does not have an abortion provider. So we are, in a much better position than many of the states across the country, but we certainly have a lot more to do to make sure that we're the safe haven state that we truly need to be in this moment.
Excellent. So Kwajelyn, you spoke a little bit about the struggles to provide abortion care in a state like Georgia during this period. It strikes me that in addition to seeing access limited in so many parts of the country, what we're also seeing is confusion. Right? So the court ostensibly settled things, but they actually created a lot of questions about the liability of physicians prescribing across state lines, whether people could travel. How has that confusion changed the nature of your practice?
Well, I think one of the things that has been really difficult, and again, I want to make sure it's clear, like this has been a challenge for a very, very long time, is that often policymakers are directing how physicians and clinicians can act in their practice without any real medical knowledge or information or accuracy. And so it can be really difficult for physicians to make split-second decisions that are based on their years of training and experience when they also have to interpret the language of a big piece of legislation that may honestly be full of typos and or based on junk science. So those are the things that make this particular period of time all the more dangerous for so many, especially those who are not necessarily specifically focused on abortion medicine, but are in other fields of healthcare, but are treating and caring for pregnant people. And those folks who are not necessarily thinking about termination of pregnancy, but are now thinking perhaps about criminal prosecution that might come to them if some harm comes to the developing fetus, or if they, in an effort to care for the person in front of them, have to make a decision about whether or not that pregnancy is harming them. And there's not a lot of clarity in many of the bans that exist about in what ways someone might be able to intervene without facing the risk of prosecution on the back end. So I wish that there was some separation, or at least some intention to be well informed before lawmakers decided to start practicing medicine from the Capitol.
It might help if more lawmakers were also not men.
Yeah.
It could help.
It would help with like knowing when the last menstrual period was. Do you remember Greg Abbott really had a hard time with this?
There's often very many interesting questions that are asked in testimony during political hearings about what's actually happening inside of our bodies.
Mm-hmm. Are you there, God? It's me, Greg Abbott. So Kelly, what does the legal landscape, like what laws are being passed? Mifepristone has been under fire over the last year, in large part because it effectively allows individuals to go underground and self-provide. So what are we seeing in terms of new laws? What are states trying to do, and how are people fighting back and responding?
Yeah, and I think you raise a good point in part because we know that opponents of abortion will stop at nothing. They pretended the Dobbs decision was about sending abortion policy back to the states. We know that was not true, and they knew it wasn't true. They quickly started talking about a congressional 15-week ban, and then, of course, they have gone after mifepristone and are attempting to revoke 20 years of health and safety standards of FDA approval of a very safe, effective, well-known medication, abortion. And so it's not about facts and science or good intent, right? And so they are also, I think, very committed to finding any component of the law that can help them achieve their goal of criminalizing abortion, prosecuting people who provide abortions or get abortions for themselves or help a loved one get an abortion. And I think that's where some of the danger really is starting to become clear. We are just scratching the surface of what a ban on abortion actually looks like in reality. So I think that is where even things like the role of district attorneys is incredibly important. The role of, this idea of preemption, right? Can a city do something in support of abortion rights, or is the state going to block them from that? And seeing this battle for abortion play out in a variety of components of legislative, legal, litigation, of course, and other parts of government and just of our infrastructures. And so I think the breadth of where this fight is going to go is almost limitless.
So, Irum, given the examples we have from overseas, like there have been the laws like what we've seen from these states. We've seen decisions from high courts that have limited access to abortion, and we've also seen movement away from that. So in Ireland, for example, there was a draconian law passed, written into the Irish Constitution, and then there was repeal. Are there other lessons that we could learn from around the world, from our global partners, that could perhaps provide a template for how we come back from this?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I mean, I think just to provide a little bit of context, right, the global context. So as Herminia said, the Dobbs decision makes the U.S. a global outlier, right, when you consider the clear sort of decades-long trend towards liberalizing abortion laws. And you know, with the Dobbs decision, the U.S. joins only 3 countries that have rolled back abortion rights since the 90s. 53 countries, on the other hand, have expanded legal grounds for abortion since the turn of the century. We've seen this most dramatically in Latin America, the so-called Green Wave, right, the mass movement to expand abortion rights in the region, and we're going to hear more about that. In the last couple of years, Mexico, Colombia, and Argentina have decriminalized or legalized, or fully legalized abortion. And it was really hard to imagine that these countries would have done so, right, even just a few years ago, given the sort of context, political context, religious context, but they made the leap forward. And, you know, so, and while the impact of Dobbs is, you know, playing out most directly, obviously, here in the US, opponents of reproductive rights may very well be emboldened by the decision and attempt to, you know, regress on abortion rights in their countries. I mean, many of the same groups that have opposed abortion in the U.S. have, you know, are actively fueling anti-rights movements in other countries. At the same time, and as I said, you know, there really is an opportunity here for mobilization for strategic advocacy at this moment. And, you know, we're going to hear from our partners in Latin America and Africa about some of the strategies that they're using at this moment.
Right, with that in mind, let's take a moment and hear from Paula Avila-Guilen, the Executive Director of the Women's Equality Center, on video. Paula's on mute. All right, we will come back to Paula in a little bit. Again, Zoom never dies. We will always be muted in perpetuity. Until then, though, more to talk about. So, Irum, back to you in terms of the global landscape. You mentioned that Dobbs, rather than looking to our global partners for solutions for how to come back, we actually might be worried that this decision in the United States will fuel more anti-choice activity elsewhere. Given that state of affairs, what can we do in the United States to support our global partners?
In terms of supporting partners, I guess I'm going to speak sort of from Guttmacher's perspective. I think there's obviously many pieces to the puzzle, right? But our piece is around evidence and data. And we're very committed to partnering with in-country organizations to generate research and get it in the hands of policymakers, advocates, journalists, to advance policy change. We think it's critical to have partners lead in formulating research projects and in developing policy recommendations that are relevant to the context in which they're working. So for example, we designed a research study with our longtime partner in Kenya, the African Population and Health Research Center, in response to their call for new evidence to inform abortion policy and the provision of reproductive health care in Kenya. And we also partner with organizations at the regional level, like International Planned Parenthood Federation Africa. We'll hear from our colleague Mallah shortly. And also in terms of US foreign policy, we generate evidence on the impact of using, US investments on global family planning and reproductive health programs. And this evidence is used by advocates and policymakers to make the case for protecting and increasing investment in sexual and reproductive health programs globally in advance, for example, of budget requests and funding negotiations in Congress. And the sort of last point I wanted to make in terms of our research is that this body of evidence that I was just referring to, the impact evidence, we have made accessible to everyone. So it allows our partners in, over 132 countries to estimate the impact of a certain level of investment in family planning services based on their own country context. And so, to help bolster their advocacy with policymakers and with donors. But I just wanted to sort of say one more thing. I mean, obviously, the research and data is one piece, and a piece that Guttmacher brings to the table. But of course, we need to come together, and we need to deploy a variety of complementary strategies and work across sectors to strengthen our movement for sexual reproductive health and rights and justice.
Right. With that in mind, let's hear from Mallah Tabot and hear from one of the providers on the ground to tell us what they're looking for, at least in International Planned Parenthood Federation of Africa region.
Lead for IPPF, Africa Regional Office. IPPF, the International Planned Parenthood Federation, is a locally led and globally connected civil society movement, and we work globally to ensure access to sexual and reproductive health and rights services. In Africa, our work spans a wide range of activities, from comprehensive sexuality education to provision of contraceptives, humanitarian response. But a critical part of our work is also access to comprehensive abortion care and advocacy in support of it. And so in June 2022, last year, when the US Supreme Court overruled Roe v. Wade, a number of rights-based and Africa-based organizations that have historically championed abortion care, specifically IPPF, Africa Regional Office, IPAS Africa Alliance, the Center for Reproductive Rights, FIGO, and Pop Council, we came together to start asking ourselves very critical questions, and we started coming together quite informally. Specifically, we wanted to understand what were the implications of this ruling beyond US borders. And so concurrently, while the US was rolling back on reproductive rights, interestingly, other countries were paving the way for these rights. Benin, for example, a small country in West Africa, had just passed a new abortion bill, which went way beyond the stipulations of the Maputo Protocol. And in Kenya, the Supreme Court declared through the Malindi case that abortion was constitutionally protected. So these were great wins happening on the continent. And so motivated by the urgent need to protect these gains that have been made while expanding access to abortion care on the continent, we started engaging in a set of consultations and meetings with partners to understand what the opportunity was for rights actors like us on the continent. So these included consultations with organizations like the Center for Human Rights and Development, CEHRD in Uganda, the Mama Network, ODAS, Reproductive Health Network Kenya, Tika Health, UNFPA, etc. And last month, we established Catalyst, which is a consortium with an ambitious and unequivocally comprehensive vision as encapsulated in our theory of change. The phrase, abortion care for all, really embodies the consortium's vision of universal abortion rights and access to high quality care. We are bold, we are unapologetic, and we are driven by African leadership. Specifically, the Catalyst Consortium aims to fulfill 5 pivotal roles. 1, convening and connecting. 2, coordinating. 3, driving technical excellence. 4, serving as a research and knowledge hub. And 5, building catalytic funding for abortion care on the continent. It is imperative that abortion remains at the front of our collective action, especially now that it is very easily targeted by the opposition. And in the same vein, as IPPF, we have other specific targeted initiatives in this regard. For example, in partnership with the Guttmacher Global Policy Team, we have provided abortion training for private healthcare providers in Kenya. IPPF is also engaged in the regional advocacy group led by UNFPA, which really seeks to advance the Guttmacher-Lancet Commission's comprehensive definition of SRHR on the continent. Catalysts, even in such an early stage, provides very valuable lessons. One, it is a consortium of rights partners that came together quite organically to collectively strategize and leverage on each other's strengths. And as a consortium of the brave, we prioritize critical areas of work which are crucial to achieving reproductive justice in the coming decade and beyond. Our goal is to be collaborative partners, working in synergy and really minimizing duplication of efforts in this resource-limited environment. Serving as both a knowledge base and a networking space, Catalyst wants to enhance the quality of interventions. We want to scale impactful approaches, and we want to contribute to expanded access to abortion care across the continent. In a time of growing opposition and diminishing rights, I call on all of us here to come together to be innovative, to be proactive, and to drive a positive movement for reproductive rights in Africa and beyond. Thank you.
And I think we're going to hear from Paula now. Is that right?
Good evening. My name is Paula Avila-Guilen, and I am the Executive Director of the Women's Equality Center and one of the leaders of the Green Wave. The Green Wave is the movement for abortion rights that was born in Argentina and it has been taking over the world. It is symbolized by the green handkerchief because it means resistant, but it also means life and hope. And it's a movement that has been able to achieve amazing victories. Over the last 3 years, we were able to legalize abortion in Argentina, Mexico, and Colombia, and very recently, emergency contraception in Honduras. All of this is the result of the Green Wave. Now, the Green Wave is arriving to the United States. And even though we have achieved these amazing victories, we also have seen devastating effects of DOPS, not only in the United States, but also in Latin America. We are facing now an opposition that seems stronger and that feels that has the momentum. Because if they were able to overturn Roe, how they are not able to overturn some of our more recent victories? Our opposition is fighting a lot harder. We are seeing and right now facing current threats to our victory in Colombia. And we have seen a massive expansion of CPCs all over the region. This is something that really worries us. We also believe that the Green Wave can be of use for the fight that we are having now in the United States. As somebody who has been originally from Colombia but living the last 18 years in the United States, I see the connections. I understand the two wars. And I believe that we can use some of the tools of the Green Wave to give this fight in the United States. One of the first lessons that the Green Wave taught me comes from a chant that says, ahora que estamos juntas, and then ends, el patriarcado va a caer. Now that we are together, patriarchy will fall. And I think that that was the most important lesson. In Latin America, once we saw the big crisis that was literally costing people's lives and people's futures, we needed to put all egos, all organizational needs aside and come together. And we needed to think outside the box. And that's the moment that we start using a multi-pronged approach. We needed communications, we needed research, we needed legal strategies, and we needed massive mobilizations. It was the combination of all the strategies what it really has been allowing us to be able to achieve those victories. I also believe that we will be a stronger movement from the US to Latin America, from Europe to Africa and Asia, if we all come together. The opposition long time ago stopped seeing and stopped funding these issues as a single issue and single country or single region. And the opposition now funds a global war on gender. And we need to fight that war as a global war. It's not only about abortion, it's not only about the gender identity, it's a war on our way of being, our way of being. It's a war on who we are and the futures that we want to have. We need to come united to be able to be more strategic, to be able to communicate with each other what is working, what is not working, identify possible threats, and really be a united movement under the Green Wave.
Very inspiring words from people who are in the field throughout the world. One of the things that seems to unite both of those remarks is a sense that this fight is not simply about abortion rights, but rather about reproductive freedom and reproductive justice. So, Kwajelyn, we are used in this country to talking about rights, reproductive rights. How can we shift and begin thinking about this fight in terms of reproductive justice?
Well, I think it goes back to some of what you brought up at the top of our discussion, how deeply inextricably linked these issues are to one another. You know, one of the things that's often talked about is how these attacks on abortion disproportionately impact certain communities. But why is that? Mm-hmm. Like, if we actually dig underneath that and we talk about the ways that white supremacy, patriarchy, and capitalism have been systemically undermining the ability for these communities to thrive for generations, and that the lack of access to reproductive freedom is just one component of the things that are making people's lives so difficult, so oppressed, so harmful, so violent. Like, that is the kind of work that I think is going to be necessary for us to achieve justice, for us to think about how the choice about whether or not to have an abortion, when it is rooted in someone's unbearable poverty, is not actually a choice. Mm-hmm. When it's a decision about whether or not someone can survive pregnancy or have the ability to terminate a pregnancy without incarceration, that is not a choice. And so even if we are able to restore the legal right to abortion, without attending to all of these other intersecting issues, we will not be free.
Mm-hmm. Well, Kelly, can we... So Kelly, I loved what Kwajelyn said, and I guess I want to talk about whether the United States can actually make that leap as a matter of public policy from reproductive rights to reproductive justice, because for a very long time in this country, the whole question of abortion access has been nested in this neoliberal ethic in which individuals are responsible for themselves. So it is a question, can I afford this baby, as opposed to, is there a social safety net around me that could help me care for this child? And you know, one of the things we talked about in the immediate aftermath of Dobbs is whether this would move the needle. Like, now that we were truly pro-life, Would we be pro-life for the whole life? Has that changed? Have we seen movement on things like paid family leave or Pregnant Workers Fairness Acts that could provide some of that social support that would make this more of a choice if it were restored, or just ameliorate these conditions on the ground now?
No.
I mean,
No, and I think it is, we talk about this a lot, we kind of generally, because those of us who support abortion rights, have been working for some of those policy goals. It is not, we all know this, right? It is not the organizations that oppose abortion that are out there pushing for a higher minimum wage and for a better social safety net for families. No, it is us, and I think that is the beauty of reproductive justice as a framework, and I think that we've made a lot of progress in getting everyday people, voters, whatever category you want to use, in recognizing that it is a much broader conversation, and that means that our policies need to be better aligned with our values. And I do come back to this idea that the public is largely on our side. It is that does not always translate to what our legislative bodies look like. That is because there have been generations of attacks on voting rights, all kinds of things that make it so that those systems actually are operating as they intended, which is to serve very specific interests, not the interests of the people. And so that gap between what the public wants and what our institutions and laws are giving us continues to grow, and I think that is where the power is, and we heard that from Paula about the green wave, right? Like that people power is where we need to go. We know it is not a one-stop solution, right? Like this is a multi-generational, multi-issue fight that got us here, and it's going to take a variety of levers, but above all else, the people power to get us out.
With that in mind, Assemblymember González-Rojas, what do the people need to be doing right now? How can we, in all of the ways that we exist, not everyone's an assembly member, not everyone is on the ground providing abortion care, but we each can do something. What are some of the things that need doing, and what kind of support do you need to get some of these policies?
So if you live in New York, go to nyassembly.gov. Look up who your assembly member is. You should know that. Most people don't know. Look up who that person is. Then go to find legislation and look up A361A. I will repeat that. A361A, which is the Reproductive Freedom and Equity Fund Act. See if your member is a co-sponsor. If not, call them, email them. If they are a co-sponsor, call them, email, thank them. Right? It is our duty. It doesn't matter if you don't speak the language. It doesn't matter if you're not a US citizen, if you're not a voter. That is okay. You, the community, the people, are our boss. I'm an elected official. I'm accountable to you. So if you live in New York, please do that, because we need to advance policies that are addressing the fact that folks do not have the resources, either in New York or across the country, to actually get care in places like New York. We need to be a true haven state. So if you don't live in New York, or if you do and you already have a great member who's on the bill, donate to an abortion fund. There's a national network of abortion funds where you can find your local abortion fund. Here in New York, at the New York Abortion Fund, and we have the Bridget Alliance and many others. Serve as an escort outside of clinics. It's incredible. Some of these clinics were facing a lot of violence and hostility, and it's really important that those of us that can show up and support those that are coming in. And really, again, keep your ear to the ground. Make sure you vote if you are eligible to vote. If you are not eligible to vote, that is okay. You can knock on doors. You can talk to your neighbors. You can talk to your family members. Stay involved. Who's in places and seats of power matters, as we see. And it is critical that we make sure that we're getting good folks in office that really get it. I think more organizers need to be in office, and that we're holding them accountable. So those are some things we could do to make sure that we're trying to build a better country and state and society to truly address abortion access.
Kwajelyn, any follow-ups from around the country?
I would echo a lot of what Jessica said. I think that Getting involved with local organizations, whether they are abortion funds, independent clinics, reproductive justice organizations, finding your political home that can allow for you to deepen in your activity and to sharpen your political analysis so that you can be useful. Oftentimes, when these things get really rough, someone says, I have an idea and I'm gonna start a thing. I bet you money somebody else has started that thing, and you could plug into that thing rather than segmenting and trying to do something on the side. So finding a political home, not a political party, but a place that is going to actually activate you to take action and give you the tools that you can use to activate others. I think the other thing is that we know that 2024 is going to be a very intense election year. Do not let federal level politics take you away from understanding what's happening locally. Because sometimes people are really mad at Congress when they should be mad at their governor. Sometimes they're mad at the governor and they should be mad at the city council. Sometimes they're mad at city council and should be mad at county commissioner. They need to understand who is making the decision about the thing that is bothering you the most. And make sure that you understand, is that an elected position? Who all is running? A lot of these places are running unopposed. There's no electoral college between you and voting your governor into office. And oftentimes those are won by a few hundred votes as opposed to a few thousand. So making sure that as the federal level politics start to take up all the air in the room, that you are looking all the way down the ballot so you understand absolutely every single position that you are running, to Jessica's point, who you are the boss of. So those are two things that I would really strongly recommend. Local is the place you have the most influence over making change.
Yeah, so just to echo, trying to get a lot in here. The down ballot races are so important. The attorney generals, the district attorneys, these are the people who are figuring out what laws
Often
mean.
judges too.
Yes.
Judges, yeah.
So, and again, you can also run for some of these positions, county commissioner, school board, where these fights are joined. Like, whether you can read Toni Morrison in school is directly related to whether or not you allow, yes, all of this is deeply, deeply, inextricably intertwined. Kelly, ideas for what we can do here in the city?
I mean, we've heard so much. It is about the direct service, the ways you can really be part of the community of helping people get the abortions they need, and it is about the politics. I also think it's about the personal. I think it's about how we have conversations and how we identify a shared value with someone and use that to try to bring them along. I think we all have our political homes, which is so important, and we all have our shared underlying values, even when you're not sure, well, most of us have them, but even when you're not sure what it is, there's usually something that can start a conversation. I like to talk about how we are not gatekeepers, we are rolling out the welcome mat. We need more hands on deck, we need more partners globally and in our communities, and I think it really is about how we kind of understand the interpersonal component and start to build back our communities through that.
And again, if you all have questions for the panel, please fill out your index cards and pass them forward, and we will get to them. Irum, I'm going to let you have the last word. This is a global fight. Like, what can we be doing to think globally about how we can intervene, how we can make our voices heard, and how we can address this issue, not just for ourselves and the people in our immediate community, but our global community of individuals?
Well, I do think, something that came out both from, in Paula's remarks is around this sort of cross-regional exchange, for example, right? I mean, we can really learn, obviously, from our partners, advocates in Latin America. Similarly, our partners in Africa, I think something that was, interesting about what Mallah said is this catalyst sort of initiative or consortium that she was talking about. I mean, this was formed in response to the Dobbs decision, right? And this is the SRHR, sexual reproductive health and rights community, coming together, sort of regional organizations, international NGOs, country level organizations coming together to collectively strategize you know, to really think about a joint kind of strategic approach, joint funding. I mean, that's pretty amazing, right? I mean, and so I think that, you know, similarly, right, to really be thinking about working strategically, working together, and also across, you know, across, as we've been talking about, this isn't just a single issue, right? So across these issues would be, I mean, you know, Dobbs was the catalyst, right? So I think that now's the time.
Yeah, that's great. All right, so I think Herminia is going to rejoin us briefly, and she will make a few remarks. I will ask some questions from the audience, and we'll be on our way soon. Thank you.
So please join me in incredible rounds of applause and for this incredible, enlightening, robust discussion from our in-person and our video participants. These kinds of events are so important because what you've heard today, first and foremost, is not just deep content expertise. You heard that. You heard not just commitment, passion. You heard that. You heard interconnectivity. You heard interdependence. You heard resilience. You heard passion. I'm going to draw a few connections as we collect any more items and turn it over to questions. These issues, the rollback of Dobbs, did not happen on June 24th, 2022. It started decades ago. It is well-funded. It happened in local races. It happened in state races. It happened in federal races. It happened with money. It happened with talking points. It happened with a relentless advancement to oppress. And these, what you've heard, is the linkages of the various ways it is the same relentless passion to oppress that led to today's Supreme Court decision. It is the same relentless passion to oppress that is leading to all of the rollbacks and the anti-trans legislation that we're seeing. It is the relentless passion to oppress that is taking a drug like mifepristone and putting it in the hands of a one-shopped judge. And people don't understand that not only is that going to render mifepristone, if the ruling holds, unavailable in all 50 states, it actually is going to impact 10 states, and it may not be the 10 states that you anticipate more than others. Because our research shows in some of the bluest states that are the most protective, they actually, mifepristone and misoprostol, the two drugs used for medication abortion is the most common way of performing abortion. So it is in some of those progressive states that you may see the rollback. So as you hear this interconnectivity, what can you do? You can support the organizations that you've heard from before. Yes, this is a shameless plug, but an important plug because the kind of work that you hear about going on day in and day out, the kinds of events that we can pull together, those need your support, your commitment, your intellectual support, your emotional support, and yes, your financial support. So you received today a little card which makes it very easy for you to donate to the New York Society for Ethical Culture, which has graciously hosted this event, and to our panelist organization, the Women's Equality Center, the Feminist Women's Health Center, and the International Planned Parenthood Federation, and of course, the Guttmacher Institute. So thank you for coming. I am looking forward to the Q&A, and with that, I turn it over back to our wonderful host.
So Herminia is a terrific host and very generously plugged a wide range of organizations whose support of this cause is really necessary and urgent, and that we hope you'll support. But I'm a member of the Guttmacher board, so let me just make a plug for Guttmacher. The work that Guttmacher does as a research institute is so critically important in this moment. A few months ago, there was a question about whether or not a major drugstore chain in the United States could continue to provide mifepristone to those to whom it had been prescribed. And when that chain went looking to the states where abortion was banned or where abortion access was in question, the maps they used were maps created by Guttmacher. Guttmacher's work is directly underwriting public policy choices in states that are protective of abortion access, and it's also underwriting just quotidian decisions by private institutions that are between patients and the care that they're seeking. So this work could not be more urgent. The research that's being done could not be more urgent, and as a board member, I really, really urge you to not only support the many important organizations that are doing work on the ground, but to remember that Guttmacher is also working on the ground, literally telling us what on the ground looks like. So thank you. All right, some great questions from the audience. All seem to be in the vein of I'm mad as hell, so I'm going to start there. Abortion rights and access are being challenged in states that have taken action to preserve and secure these rights. Consider the FDA's authorization of mifepristone. How can we work to safeguard abortion rights when this is like whack-a-mole and there's a new threat every day?
I see you looking at me, Melissa. I mean, it comes back to some of what we were just talking about, that this is not a single policy solution and we can all like call it a day and go home, right? This was decades of, as soon as Roe v. Wade was decided in 1973, opponents of abortion got to work. They built power in the states. They won election after election. They won state house seat after state house seat, and they created an entire infrastructure to develop policy ideas, find the legislators who would push them, and build, a media conglomerate around it as well. And then they started stacking the judiciary. Again, they were playing a 30-year game and beyond, and here we are. And so we heard a lot in the videos about innovation and proactiveness, and I think that is where we as a movement and as a community need to be right now, because it is not a single bill in Congress that gets us out of this. It's not a single state bill. Those are all incredibly important, and we have to figure out how we take back the power so that, again, our legislative bodies are actually representative of the people. And so I think the answer is not a simple one. It is a look to everywhere, because the answers are in all of those places, and we need all of them.
Did you want to ask?
I just want to add that I think, again, I go back to voting just because I'm an elected official, but also some of the work we did at the Latina Institute was about civic engagement and how powerful and important that is. As was mentioned, you have to also look at every level of government. You mentioned school boards. School boards, again, determine what kind of books we're reading. It also determines what kind of policies we have in our schools, like sex ed, and I'm very proud to carry the sex ed bill here in New York. But those really matter. What kind of education are our communities getting at young? How are we talking about consent and healthy relationships and LGBTQI rights and acceptance and support and love? Like, how are those things talked about? And oftentimes the people in those positions are shaping those policies, and those are very, very local. But I think we have to think about the long game in the same way that we're feeling the repercussions of the rights long game strategy. So looking at judges, looking at school board members, looking at city council, county commissions, all that is really, really critical. So again, if you can't vote, there's someone in your life that can, and to really make sure that we are showing up and showing our power in the voting booth and doing what we can to continue to engage folks, even if we can't vote ourselves.
Here's a question that relates directly to this issue of voting and democracy. We saw in the immediate aftermath of Dobbs that states like Kansas, red states, actually were protective of abortion access when the issue was put directly to the people in a ballot initiative, as opposed to being mediated through representative government through a state legislative bill. What are the prospects for direct democracy around the country, and how can we harness that energy more effectively?
Well, I'll just say, in some states, like Georgia, any ballot measure has to go through the legislature anyway, and that's true in some other parts of the country as well. So they have rigged the game in many ways to try to prevent people from being able to speak on their own behalf. So I do think that it is possible in some parts of the country, and I think it's a really powerful tool, but in some states, they've already sort of curbed that as an option.
Yeah, and I think that's very true. Abortion wins on the ballot almost every time. A hugely important tool in our toolbox, not the only tool. And our opponents are going after it, right? We're seeing that in Ohio right now. So they know, the legislators get scared. They know that if abortion is on the ballot, it will win. The people want abortion rights and legality and access. And so what they're doing instead is moving the goalposts, making it harder to get things like abortion on the ballot in the first place. And so we can't look to ballot measures, again, as our silver bullet, because those kind of last grasps of power, they are holding on to it in any way they can, and changing the rules of the game while we're playing the game is very much something that they do.
We should also note that Mississippi, which was the state that enacted the law that was the subject of the Dobbs challenge, Mississippi has actually passed a bill that limits ballot initiatives to any issue except abortion. So, good work. Too much democracy. Okay. Can we look to any movements outside of the fight for reproductive justice for examples and takeaways that might inform our own movement and future mobilization?
When I was at Latina Institute, one thing we looked at is harm reduction movements, particularly when we talked about self-managed abortion care. And we looked at everything from needle exchange programs to opioid prevention centers, and looking at ways that we can make sure that we're protecting folks that may not have access. And there's lots of harm reduction mechanisms around abortion care, right? There's Women on Waves and programs where people who don't have access can get abortion medication through other mechanisms. And, self-managed abortion care was a really important conversation in our movement for many years, and making sure that we preserve access to misoprostol even if mifepristone goes away. So I think talking about this often through, and unfortunately through a harm reduction lens, is something we have to do given the trajectory that we're on. But I think we also need to look at movements like racial justice movements and LGBTQ liberation movements and immigration rights movement. There's a lot of, again, linkages and intersectionality between those movements, and we're so much more powerful together than when we're divided and siloed.
So the one that often comes up is the LGBTQIA movement in terms of a movement that literally went from outlaws to in-laws in the space of 20 years. And people have asked, why can't the reproductive rights movement do that? Why can't we normalize the prospect of abortion care in the same way that people came to understand that they loved gay people? Like, there are people that they loved who happened to be gay. What's the barrier here? I mean, is it just ingrained misogyny in our society? Is it this idea that abortion is different? Why can't we mimic or emulate what this other movement has done?
Well, one of the things that I want to just bring into that is that the movement was able to accomplish marriage, but there are so many other fundamental human rights that have been left on the table for queer and trans folks. And so being able to focus in on a very sort of singular aspect of human rights, or civil rights, but probably more accurate in that case, has been, I think, a strategy of the reproductive health rights and justice movement, to think specifically about the legal right. But what we know is that that leaves so many people behind. And so I don't necessarily think about the fight for marriage equality as the exact strategy that our movements need to emulate, because I think that the narrowness will stifle our creativity and innovation that is necessary. So I would rather us lean to a broader, more intersectional agenda than us to focus on sort of a single issue that we think we can win that might be low-hanging fruit.
And I totally agree, and I would add, there are really beautiful, incredible culture change efforts happening that have made big strides. If you look at Shout Your Abortion, We Testify, right? A lot of these abortion storytelling projects and programs, that's what they're intended to do. They want to get us to a place where we're not, I mean, I'm going to say it, Joe Biden saying, I'm not big on abortion, right? Like, okay,
Get big on it. Get big on it.
So it's about policy, yes, but if the culture is not caught up with the policy change, that causes a lot of problems down the road, as we're seeing. And so I think it's a yes and, because the culture change components of the work that many of our peers are doing are incredibly important.
Irum, are there movements outside of the United States and outside of reproductive rights outside of the United States that we can draw on here?
I mean, I do think that, I think the human rights, right, movement, I think, and again, the linkages, right? I mean, looking at human rights, both thinking, we don't think of human rights all that much, right, in the US, but I think drawing from human rights movements around the world is definitely, because again, it does speak to really all of the rights that we're talking about, right, are sort of encompassed within this broader umbrella, I suppose. So I think that, I think that that's something that we should really draw from,
One last question here. Is fetal personhood the end goal, and how do we stop it?
So I will just share that as a part of the 6-week ban that was passed in Georgia, fetal personhood was written into it. It essentially defined a natural person in every place that it appears in the Georgia Code as including a fetus or embryo at any stage of development. And certainly as we were challenging that law, we fought to overturn all of it, but they also built into that law an attempt to prevent it from being severed. So they the state presented that this would not interfere or counteract the language of the 6-week ban as it was defined, and should not affect our ability to provide abortion under those constraints. But it does open up all kinds of ambiguity and vagueness about how it might be applied in other contexts. So if a person who is pregnant leaves the state, are they, kidnapping? If they fall down the steps, are they endangering a child? Like, there are lots of different ways that this could be misinterpreted or used to bring harm to a multitude of people. We have not seen any activity happen at the state level on this, but I know that this is at least one test to try to see whether or not this kind of language can make it into other states. It also included language that would allow for people to claim their pregnancy as a dependent on their taxes, and to be able to access child support payments during pregnancy. All of this not necessarily to provide more resources to pregnant people in the state, but to undergird this idea that a fetus or an embryo is a child and should be treated like a child. And so we have to continue to look at the ways that they're going to say, oh, well, this doesn't mean anything. We're just, we just included it for no reason. But that eventually these things may come to pass, and it just depends on, a rogue prosecutor who wants to make a name for themselves, or a particular part of the state that says we want to actually punish this family or this pregnant person before we'll start to see the ramifications. But fetal personhood certainly is something that we should be paying really close attention to.
In addition to the Georgia bill, there is also a case in Texas brought by Jonathan Mitchell, who is the architect of SB 8, the Texas Bounty Hunter Law, and it's basically a wrongful death suit. The interesting thing about wrongful death, he is suing on behalf of a estranged husband, the wife's friends for helping her to secure a medication abortion. And interesting, he did not sue under SB 8. He sued under wrongful death because wrongful death provides for legal negligence and liability in circumstances where a person has been wrongfully killed through someone else's negligence. So again, another backdoor way into fetal personhood. So as Mad-Eye Moody said in Harry Potter, constant vigilance. Constant vigilance. There's a lot of work to do, and really great to be in this dark space, but with all of you leading light. So thank you so much for this remarkable conversation. I'm going to turn it back over to Herminia, and I will see you all later. Thank you so much for a warm reception.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Jessica, Kwajelyn, Kelly, who I see every day, and Irum. This was an incredible panel. And one more round of applause, please. So many insights shared. So much passion brought into the room. I feel inspired. I feel motivated. I feel strong, tall, and resilient as a result of listening to all of you. I hope you all feel the same. I can't see any of you because the light is shining right in my eyes. But for all of those who joined us in person and online, our deep gratitude and appreciation for your attention, for your affection, because we need it in this fight. So thank you for joining us in community this evening.
Thank you.